tax house, you guys can see our plaque right there. And it reads, we make a fine bourbon, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always fine bourbon. Now that plaque was originally located at the front gate in those stone walls out there. And it was laid there by all of our founders, so you understood as you arrived on this property, the only thing you're gonna find here is a fine bourbon. But throughout the years, Pappy enthusiasts kept trying to steal that sign from us. We had to move it in here for its own protection. Now this building right here is called Stillhouse A. Stillhouse A, when it was in full production, produced a barrel of bourbon every 4 minutes and 17 seconds. And we accomplished this feat because we had the world's tallest copper column still till 1955. It was 65 feet tall and it was housed in that bell tower appearance side of the building there. Now that bell tower appearance, as I described it, was how everyone described it back then because they compared the building's likeness to that of a cathedral church. So that is where our nickname comes from, the Cathedral of Bourbon. We joined the war effort at World War II, and we made a lot of industrial alcohol for all the big guns out at sea. Then starting post-World War II up until the year 1959, it is classified as the golden age of bourbon, where it is king. It's the only alcohol anybody wants, and it is great to be in the business. Then starting in the 1960s till about 2008, 2015, that time period is classified as the Bourbon Depression, where nobody wants bourbon anymore. Does anybody want to guess why that started in the 1960s? Counterculture, which meant if my parents or grandparents did something, I refused to do it anymore. And that meant bourbon was out, because bourbon was classified as granddad's drink and mom and dad's beverage. They didn't want it. They wanted new beverages, new ways of life. And this counterculture movement influences everything from literature to movies. The greatest example is called James Bond 007. Now, has anybody else here read the original books? I'm always alone, it's okay. Now, these books were written in the 1940s and 50s when bourbon was king. What country does James Bond come from? No. Where does Sean Connery come from? There you go. That's why he got the role. He had the authentic Scottish accent. And what do they drink there? Scotch. And because it's in the 1940s and 50s, James Bond does not drink the martini. He drinks a bourbon called I.W. Harper's Gentleman's Bourbon. And the reason he drinks that beverage in the books is because it is a status symbol beverage. You only consume it at high-stake business meetings, which he did because every meeting was with the bad guys. And it helped set the stage as to how serious that interaction was in the books. But the producers and directors felt the character himself, James Bond, was so out of date and unrelatable for the youth of the 1960s, they did every little thing they could to modernize him, which was change his beverage to the martini, the choice of beverage for the youth at that time. Now we know what's going on culturally in the United States in the 1960s. Let's come back here, shall we? Early 1960s, Pappy retired. A year later, he died. He was 91 years old. He never saw his life work go down the drain. That was handed down to his poor son, Julian Jr. He inherited the CEO position and all of his father's voting rights. He only wanted to make bourbon. Problem? It just wouldn't sell. So he's forced to sell the company off to an owner called Norton Simon. They came in and they were feeling the marketing's trends. They're noticing a lot of companies at this time that are having great success did not have a family name to their company, but they had a brand name to their company. So a bourbon that we made at that time that did make a good, consistent profit for us was called the Old Fitzgerald. So they renamed this distillery the Old Fitzgerald Distillery in hopes that it would increase our sales. That's why it's on the smokestack there. Now, it never really increased our sales, but it did maintain us for 20 years. And after that 20 years, they threw in the towel and sold us off. We changed hands for the next few years until 1992. We come under the ownership of a company called United Distillers. They come in and they're filling the marketing's trends. It's flipped. Nobody wants a brand name company product anymore. They want a family name company product. So they rename us back to Stitzel-Weller in hopes that it would increase our sales. And it does absolutely nothing to help our sales out whatsoever, that by 1993, they shut us down. No more bourbon was being produced here anymore. And at that time, all the bourbon we had produced prior to the shutdown was placed into barrels. The barrels were placed into the rick houses. They walked out that gate, locked it, and abandoned this place completely full of bourbon because it had zero value at that time. Now that same year, the only way we could turn a profit out of this location was for United Distillers to sell off all the names and mash bills of every product that we made here. So this is the year that all the Wellers, Old Fitzgerald, Cabin Still, and Rebel Yell left this location because that was the only way we could turn a profit. So let's fast forward to the year 1997. United Distillers merges / is bought by a beer company I enjoy called Guinness. Guinness sends people to this location, take an inventory, figure out how they can turn a profit. Well, the only thing they could find at this location that has any value whatsoever is the bourbon itself. So Guinness decides to start selling the full barrels of bourbon for $200 just to try and turn a profit out of this location. Now, if that makes you want to go back in time and buy those barrels, they wish you would come back too, because not one barrel sold. That was how bad bourbon was out of favor during the 90s. That same year, Guinness merged with another company called PLC Metropolitan, and the merger formed the company we know as Diageo. And as he had his sister there and present, she was trying to help out as much as he could. Well, the divide of trying to sell, keep the company and stuff drove the family apart. So he made the rip line afterwards to publicly apologize to her at that time. And it was kind of the beginning of the Pappy line. Have you guys seen those?
I had a bottle of Rip Van Winkle.
The Rip Van Winkles.
Yeah,
now, those bottles are actually hand painted, is what people tell me. Because they originally started with him, where he would hand paint it and make his alcohol and place it in there and sell that.
Yeah.
And that's where that came from. Now, the Pappy line himself came from Pappy's grandson. So that's Julian the Third.
Okay.
He
So
bought the
named it after
He did it because he was banking on the family's notoriety.
Gotcha.
And what he did with that was, because of the family's fame, he was hoping it would sell his product. Because he bought the distillery up in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and started making his product. And it worked. He was making great profit, but he kind of sort of hit a wall at that time where he could not produce more, but the demand was there. We're a barrel manufacturing shop. This was only a fix-it shop for all 338,000 barrels that were leaking at the same time. And the process of fixing barrels back then was actually relatively simple. Someone ran around the rick house and marked on the barrel where it was leaking. Then someone had the miserable job of carrying the 550 pound barrel from the rick house into here. Once it arrived, it was weighed. Once it was weighed, using 2 4x4s and manpower, they rolled the barrel up here on top of the vat, popped the bung out of the bunghole, emptied the bourbon into the vat. Once it was completely emptied, they bring it down and loosen all the rings. And then they raise them up like such. Then they would use this, a cattail reed, to fix the leak. The reason they use this is because this is neutral. It does not impart any flavor enhancements or impurities to the bourbon. You place it between the staves that are leaking, if it'll go in the staves. There we go. And then bring the rings back down. Tighten them down. Put the bourbon back in the barrel. Once the bourbon hits the reed, it'll expand and form a seal. From there, it is weighed and out to the rick house it goes.